Thank you all so much for being here today. I have been shamelessly recruiting all conference long audience members for this, and I'm happy to see my efforts have paid off. It really is an honor to be here. I have been attending AAC&U conferences for several years now, and each time I come home with some little nugget, some concrete ideas, something that I can take back to my campus and think about. And so when Karen and Dawn contacted me about doing this, and they said, we want something really practical. We want to hear what you're doing at USF and how you're doing it. And I was like, perfect. I can talk to that. And I know, I think there'll be at least a few of you who hopefully will get some ideas that you might take back to your own campus. The title of my talk is Glocalizing Your Campus, from Aspiration to Implementation. And I obviously chose that word very deliberately. I am one of those, I heard yesterday, in fact, another session speaker differentiate between internationalizing and globalizing. And I too sort of ascribe to that idea that there's a difference in the terminology there. And so when I'm on campus, I usually talk about globalizing curriculum, that kind of thing. I put the local in here, the glocalizing, to emphasize that the kinds of experiences students can have that can be that transformative kind of experience that we hope happens and typically happens with study abroad. I think those kinds of experiences can happen on campus as well, both on campus and with community partners. And so I really wanted to emphasize that. And at USF, we're really trying to create those kinds of very meaningful, intentional experiences on campus as well as with our community partners and abroad that we hope will have that kind of transformative experience. So that's why I chose that word and that title for my talk. Institutional context is extremely important for global learning initiatives. You have to know your students, you have to know your faculty, your staff. And so just to give you a real quick background into who USF is, we are a large public research university located in metropolitan Tampa Bay area. Research is at the core of our mission. Carnegie classification is we are very high research activity. We are also very community engaged, which is also recognized by Carnegie. So that's really important to us. Our size, we have over 42,000 students total just at our Tampa campus. We are part of a system. There's a USF system with 3 separately accredited institutions. Tampa is the main one, and that's what I'll be speaking to you about today. Over 3,000 of those students are undergraduates. So we have a very large student population. I believe it's about 4% now we're up to for study abroad. Am I even higher now? Wonderful. Okay. So we are making concerted efforts to increase that number. 53% though about our transfer students. So that's something that we really have to take into account too. The program that we develop has to take into account both FTIC, the first time in college, as well as our transfer. And another aspect of our student population that's extremely important is that the vast majority of them come from Florida, if not even the Tampa Bay area. And oftentimes they don't have experiences outside the state of Florida, and sometimes not even Tampa. So these are all things that are important to us that we have to take into account. And we do have 9% of that of our total student population are international students. And so we're also thinking about ways to engage them even more. We have many wonderful programs on campus already, but that's also a student population that we're very interested in. The university as a whole, we envision ourselves as a global research university. That's extremely important to us. It's in our strategic plan. In fact, goal number 1 of our strategic plan is to prepare well-educated and highly skilled global citizens. And so that is crucial to our mission, and also really helps provide that support that we need to advance global learning on our campus. And we're very proud of the fact that we were awarded the 2013 Senator Paul Simon Award for Campus Internationalization. So this is part of our background. And I have a timeline here, which I know you can't read, and it's really not necessarily intended for you to read, but just to be impressed by, that's all. What it is, it's documenting, charting our path from towards this Global Citizens Project that we're working on now. And the point here is to recognize that this is a journey, and it's a very long one. Yesterday we were talking about the amount of time it takes and how much effort and time has gone into things. This is at least 10 years in the making. And there have been various points along the way, which are sort of the things you can't read, that have been critical. And there's also been sort of long-term programming that's been going on. And I just want to highlight 3 of those things because they form the real true foundation for the Global Citizens Project. One is that in in 2005, we began completely revising our general education curriculum. And as part of that, we developed a one-course requirement in the area of human and cultural diversity in a global context. That's the name of that core area, and students have to fulfill 3 credit-hour requirements in that. Also, as part of that revision, we developed something called dimensions. You could almost think of them as learning outcomes. There's 14 dimensions to our general education curriculum, and they're kind of woven in and into the curriculum. So you may have a course in natural science that addresses different kinds of dimensions. So it may be scientific perspectives, it may be ethical perspectives. But the important point here is that as part of those dimensions, there's 2 that are relevant for global citizenship. And one is human and cultural diversity, and the other is global context. So we had already had this woven into our curriculum as far back as 2009 when we fully implemented our gen ed curriculum. So that's important to know. Following that, we had a task force, the provost appointed a task force to really think about how we can intentionally globalize the campus. And that resulted in an administrative unit called USF World, which is the administrative unit responsible for globalizing the USF system. And that is led by a vice provost and USF system vice president for global engagement. He reports directly to our provost. So it's really important to have that infrastructure at the highest levels, and we do, to provide that support. So I wanted to point that out. The third thing that I think was really important for our progression towards the Global Citizens Project was USF was one of the 32 universities to participate in the AAC&U Shared Futures General Education for a Global Century program. As a result of that participation, we developed the Global Citizenship General Education Program that Dawn mentioned earlier, which is actually now completed. It was something that we started in 2011. We launched it, and as a result of our moving towards the Global Citizens Project, we have sort of moved away from that, and we have a little bit different approach. And we have a different approach because this program really, well, it's my fault. We threw in everything but the kitchen sink into this program. But it was our opportunity to pilot various activities that we knew were high-impact practices, for example, first-year learning communities, globally themed course clusters. And so students entered this program. They had to apply. And they were in several general education courses together. And those courses had a specific global emphasis in some way or another. And if they didn't originally, faculty worked to actually revise those courses. And so the students would, in a cohort, take all these classes together. And at the very end of it, after their 2 years of general education, they were guaranteed a study abroad scholarship. So that was the carrot, right? A $2,000 study abroad scholarship. We started the cohort out with 23 students. It was in 2011. And then we began to expand. And so the next 2 years, we scaled up. We had 50 students the second year and 80 students the third year. A lot of lessons learned there. Probably the most important was that we need flexibility. This was a far too structured program for scaling up. And so we started to think about, we were able to determine what were the things that might be able to work for us and what might not. So we learned many things from that. But I want to also emphasize the learning outcomes. And just as a way to show how we were mapping onto the LEAP essential learning outcomes. At the top in the beige, you can't, probably in the back can't read it, but it's knowledge of human cultures and the physical and natural world, intellectual practices or skills, and personal social responsibility. Those are the LEAP that we were mapping onto. And we were mapping onto those with our existing dimensions in our general education curriculum. So that was the focus. But as I said, we learned many things. But I think one of the most important lessons, besides the fact that we need flexibility, and this is the trip to Panama that I took 8 of those students on at the very end, was that faculty need support. They needed support to this. The ones that were participating were really doing it out of the goodness of their heart. And that's not sustainable, as we all know. And so that was extremely important. But we also learned that our students, I think we might have had this perception of our students that because they're predominantly in-state, haven't been outside of Florida, that maybe there wouldn't be a strong interest in this. And the students that participated and the ones and many who wanted to but couldn't because of the structured nature of the curriculum, really were seeking out these kinds of experiences, and they really wanted it in their coursework. So that was a huge lesson learned for us. So we were super appreciative of being able to participate in the shared futures. But what I want to talk to you about really is the Global Citizens Project today, what we're doing now. This is a fairly comprehensive project that we're working on. We're doing it as, this is our QEP. For those of you who are in the southeastern region, you'll know what a QEP is, a Quality Enhancement Plan. It's a requirement for reaffirmation of accreditation by SAC-COC. And so a Quality Enhancement Plan is a 5-year plan around an area of student learning that your university thinks is important. You develop that plan that will hopefully enhance learning in that area, and of course you assess that learning. So this is our QEP. There's certain advantages to having a global learning project be a QEP, and that is you're guaranteed, or at least you should be guaranteed, some resources, and also you're on a very compressed time frame, so you have to move quickly, and so you'll actually get things accomplished, whether you like it or not, because SACS is coming. So these are the major components of the plan, and I want to talk briefly about I'll try to talk briefly about each one of these because there's quite a lot in there. And in fact, I'll post this PowerPoint on our website, and I'll give you the website at the end. And much of this is already on our website, so you can sort of ferret around if you're interested. And of course, please feel free to contact me if you want more information. But really the goal of the Global Citizens Project is to develop our students' willingness and ability to engage meaningfully with diverse people, places, events, challenges, and opportunities. That's essentially our definition of a global citizen. And so everything that we're doing is framed around that. There is a conceptual framework. It's sort of pulling everything together for us. And you have a copy of that on your table. And there's a lot packed in here, so I want to sort of unpack it for you briefly. At the very bottom is our definition of global citizenship. What I want you to notice in the middle are the green boxes: global awareness, global responsibility, and global participation. These are 3 primary concepts: awareness, response, and participation, that were identified by Hans Schottler in his book, The Practices of Global Citizenship. He had interviewed many people around the world and came up with common themes. And these were the 3 primary concepts of folks who identified or were identified as global citizens. The 3 primary concepts central to being a global citizen. Now, on the either side, you'll see on the left side, affective, cognitive, and those are student learning outcomes that USF has defined for itself. And on the right side are the cognitive learning outcomes. As we were reviewing the literature, and really we looked at many schools and what other places were doing in terms of trying to develop our learning outcomes, and ultimately we decided we really needed to define them for ourselves. And so that's what those 6 learning outcomes, those are the 6 learning outcomes for the Global Citizens Project in the beige boxes. And the whole process of developing these learning outcomes was very interesting, and I'll get to that in a second. But what you may notice is there's a bit of a progressive element to this development. On the right side, the cognitive is really following Bloom's taxonomy, knowledge, analysis, and synthesis. So there's an idea that there is sort of building a scaffolding. And the same on the left side with the affective and the cognitive, sort of self-awareness. You need to be self-aware and aware of others before you can be being willing to be thinking about others and making decisions based on your awareness of others. And then practice, actually putting into action your professed ideas and concern for others. So, and then there's also sort of a horizontal idea as well, in part because of that developmental. To be globally aware, you need some self-awareness, but you also need some knowledge, basic knowledge about other people. And so you'll see that willingness with analysis and practice with synthesis going across. So those feed into those 3 central concepts. That's our framework that we're working off of. Now, you also have this. You have a much more colorful version. This is the craziest thing in the world. However, there have been about 1 billion and 1 versions of this. But this is, again, at the very bottom, you'll have the affective and the cognitive domain, the affective and cognitive domain, and the cognitive domain. Those are our learning outcomes underneath. But they're organized differently here to show how they're mapping up into our strategic plan and the university mission. So this is wonderful for faculty, for departments, thinking about, okay, if I'm in alignment, or if I'm actually working on these learning outcomes with my students, I'm directly contributing to our strategic plan and to the university mission. So we wanted to keep that, and this is the heart of what we're doing at the Global Citizens Project, those learning outcomes. Everything comes back to those learning outcomes. So I want to recognize that. And it is a work in progress. We are still working on this. We are still refining these, but we had to start somewhere. And so this is our starting point. And so we're developing many activities that address this. And so our strategy for actually providing students with the opportunities to develop these knowledge and skills is through three goals, three programmatic goals or strategies. One we call Global FKL, and you won't know what that means, but FKL stands for Foundations of Knowledge and Learning. That's our core curriculum, our general education and our capstone experience. And so the idea is here that we're going to provide undergraduates with an introduction to global learning, global competencies through general education. Second, global pathways. That's bringing global learning into the majors, into the disciplines. And so here we're inviting departments to quote-unquote globalize their curriculum and their co-curriculum so they can practice and apply their global competencies within the context of their discipline and really hopefully see the value of an enhanced, of a globalized discipline, or the value of a global perspective for a discipline. And then the goal 3 is we have developed a Global Citizen Awards program for undergraduate students. The idea here is to encourage and reward students for seeking out global experiences. And this is, again, intended to reinforce, for students to reinforce those global competencies. So those are our 3 primary strategies. And I want to break each one of those down a little bit for you to give you an idea of how we're actually doing this, how we're operationalizing everything. Global FKL, strategy 1. You'll recall that I said that we have dimensions and that 2 of them are global context and human and cultural diversity. Those are actually our starting point for developing our learning outcomes for the Global Citizens Project. So this is the one required component. We are requiring any courses that are in social and behavioral sciences, fine arts, or humanities to address one or other of those dimensions. So they have to incorporate it into their courses. We've left alone natural science, mathematics, and English composition for now. Although I have to say natural science, there's many departments who are actually wanting to contribute because they obviously see themselves as being global as well. But that's one point. Then we have that 1 credit hour course one course requirement that I mentioned in human and cultural diversity in the global context. Any course in that area has to address both of those dimensions because that is the name of the core area in and of itself. So they will have to do that. The majority of them actually already do. We are going to transition courses. We're going to ask faculty to redesign these courses as needed through our existing recertification process. Every 5 years, a course comes up and has to be recertified, and so it's in that process that we'll ask for evidence that they have, quote-unquote, globalized their course. And we actually have the whole course certification form developed. It's on our website. So if you're curious about that too, it's quite prescribed, but it's going to enable us to directly tie everything back to these learning outcomes. And the General Education Council actually helped us develop that, so it's wonderful. These are the award requirements. They're on our website as well. But that award, the importance here is that we wanted something flexible enough that a student, regardless of their major or if they were a transfer student, that they could complete the award. So they choose how they complete the award. They could do it through co-curricular activities, or they could do it through curriculum, through foreign language study, through courses that will get labeled as Global Citizens courses, or study abroad, undergraduate research, internships. They decide how they want to do it. But all of those experiences have to have a global component. And they have to also do reflections on each one of those activities. Everything comes back to the learning outcomes. Those reflections are asking students to actually reflect on their learning for each one of the learning outcomes. The pathways, which is again in the majors, mirrors or parallels the award because it's asking departments to think about the curriculum and the co-curriculum and those high-impact practices that are ways that students can complete the award. So departments who want to create a global pathway for their major have to align a couple of courses in their major with the learning outcomes, identify some high-impact practices within their discipline that will contribute to students' global learning, and also think about the co-curricular. And so as they develop those plans, it'll enable a student to easily complete the award in the context of their major. Now, there needs to be a lot of support for faculty, as I was mentioning, to go along with this. And so we have hired 2 faculty developers who are here today with us, Kara and Summer. You may have met them earlier. And they are in the process of developing a lot of programming for our faculty and staff to support their work on their individual courses and on their degree programs. And so we have 2 faculty learning communities that will be happening at the same time, one for the departments to work on their pathways, one for individual faculties to be working on their courses. And we'll have all sorts of other programming. We're just now, I should mention, we've just started to implement this fall. And so we are still building the plane as we fly it, but we have a lot in place, and so we're excited about where we're headed. Assessment, obviously we have to assess. We've just hired our assessment specialist for the Global Citizens Project. He starts on Monday. I cannot wait. But this is what we had originally identified in terms of the instruments that we might use to assess each one of those learning outcomes. And 3 of them are existing that you can actually purchase or are already available. For example, the HEC Global Mindedness Scale, the Global Perspective Inventory, and the Global Awareness Profile. And the other items we'll have to actually develop in-house. So that's why I'm so excited he's starting soon, because we have to get moving on that. I'm just going to put this down because I don't even know where I am on that. So how do we do it? I'll summarize as quickly as possible with a lot of people. At least over 150 people have been involved in this process over the past 2 years. This has been 2 years in the making. And we started out, we had a steering committee that has been sort of in charge of it all from the very beginning. But then we broke things down. We've had various subcommittees. We've had various focus groups. The primary folks that have been involved, the primary committees are here. We had the steering committee. Then when we were trying to figure out what are the strategies, well, once we had our learning outcomes, or at least a working draft, we said, how are we actually going to implement this? And so we formed 2 committees around that, curriculum and co-curriculum committees. And they came up with independently, these 2 groups came up with the strategies, the 3 strategies in the end. It was really interesting. Think about how the folks you have on these committees. We made a concerted effort to have representatives from all the academic colleges, from student affairs, from our areas of strategic emphasis, such as undergraduate research and community engagement. And that really brought together lots of folks to the table who don't necessarily always talk. And so it was wonderful. And it was great so that the 2 committees came up with the 3 strategies. And then when we actually started to talk about and think about, well, how are we actually going to implement these strategies, we then formed 3 committees around those 3 strategies. And so we had a global FKL team, we had a global pathways team, and a global citizen awards team. And they really started to think about how to actually implement and operationalize. Oh, I have some lessons learned that I'd like to share with you. I mean, that is our project up at this point. I've gone through it very, very quickly. But there is a lot of information on our website, and as I said, I'd be happy to share with you. But I want to share some lessons learned as well. And in terms of defining the learning outcomes, that was probably the hardest part. Spend a lot of time on this. It's been 2 years in the making, and we're still refining. I mean, we went through an exploratory phase where we looked at the literature, we did brainstorming, we did student surveys, thinking about what does it mean to be a global citizen, and that's when we realized what's in the literature isn't quite fitting with what we want. So we went ahead and started drafting our own. And there we had faculty committees come together and think about what does it mean to be a global citizen. And at that point, we had put everything into that. We had everything in there. So that's why I say there have been many versions of that. I wanted something that could fit on one page. That was my goal. But that captured everything. And then we're still refining, as I said. I think the biggest lesson learned here was this. If we wanted folks to be really engaged in this process, regardless of their role at the university, these learning outcomes had to be meaningful to everybody. And then we said, but specific to none. That was important, that specific to none part, because what that enabled folks to do is to be able to see themselves. We wanted anybody, any department, any discipline to be able to see themselves in those learning outcomes and not to have to say, oh, well, that's the role of the World Languages Department, for example. And that was key. That was hard for us because we understand the importance of foreign language and the link between language and culture. But when we had it in there, it was always, oh, that's for the World Languages Department. So once we let that go and we said, well, put it in. It's in there, but it's through communication and thinking about communication. That enabled us to move forward. And so our learning outcomes are designed specifically to be broad enough so that anybody might contribute, but hopefully still meaningful and measurable. And so that was a very important lesson learned for us in that development phase. developing those collective strategies that cross disconnected units. This is important. I'm sort of setting this as a starting point. Assume you're going to do that you're going to try to do that. I think that's very important. And as I mentioned, the various committees that we formed had broad representation from across the campus. And what was wonderful about that is that, one, people obviously didn't know what was going on in housing, for example, versus in an academic department. But we have many different sites of learning, global learning, already going on campus. And it brought people to the table, and they started to think about ways that they could connect what they're doing with other units on campus. Establish guiding principles. This is where your institutional context is extremely important. For us, in Florida, the state of Florida, we have several legislations that really create some parameters for us that we have to work in. I was trying to say that as nicely as I could. We have something called excess credit hours. Once a student reaches 110% of their credit hours required for the degree, and they go beyond that, they're charged double tuition. And so one of our guiding principles was no new requirements for students. We had to figure out ways to infuse this into existing curricular requirements for students so that they wouldn't be going beyond. And that's why the award in itself is either through curriculum or co-curriculum. You decide, so that the students have that flexibility to actually earn it without necessarily incurring excess credit hours. Use institutional strategic priorities. For us, undergraduate research, community engagement, education abroad, these are very, very important to us. And so we wanted to work with those offices. And what's wonderful about that is those offices typically, if they're strategic priorities, there's typically already resources dedicated to those priorities. So what you can do there is tap into what they already have and just sort of infuse that global in there. So we've been working with these offices, and they're doing what they normally do, but they're also, for example, providing faculty grants specifically for faculty who want to incorporate service learning, but with a global emphasis, a global perspective. And so we've been working with those offices. Form committees around areas of importance. We started out knowing we wanted to include the co-curriculum. So that second phase, when we were talking about the strategies, we had a curriculum development team and we had a co-curriculum. And we did that purposefully to make sure that the co-curriculum was included, that it wouldn't get excluded if we had a bunch of faculty members together, for example, where that could potentially happen. And then find ways to integrate the curriculum and the co-curriculum. We're doing it through the pathways and through the award. There are many other ways, obviously. But what we wanted to do is, our whole purpose was to make sure that everything that we're providing was not only connected, but that was obvious to students. So you'll see, for example, in our courses, when a course gets certified as a Global Citizens course, they have to have a Global Citizen assignment, and it's labeled as such, and talk about the learning outcomes that it directly addresses. And the reflections that we're creating that students have to fulfill, again, go back to those learning outcomes. So there's many different ways to be creative around that. But the co-curriculum, and if you work with student affairs or if you're in student affairs, you know how wonderful the program that they offer is and how that really, that experience for students really helps their development. Many times more than a class can, so really partner with them. Work within existing structures and systems. There are several things that were already ongoing that we are tapping into. For example, that course certification process. Rather than, we contemplated creating a whole different committee, like equivalent to the General Education Committee and the Undergraduate Council, General Education Council, that are existing faculty senate standing committees. But we said, no, let's work with what's already there. And so we've been working with them, and those are the two bodies that will be certifying courses and reviewing them. Community engagement, as I said, we have offices, and so the Center for Leadership and Civic Engagement and Student Affairs will be providing lists of opportunities for community service for our students, and they will be vetting those for us to make them, to ensure that they're global. Same with our Office of Community Engagement and Partnerships, that's on the academic side and service learning courses. They have their own sort of vetting process for determining if it's a service learning course. And so they're willing to say when it's going to be a global service learning course. Same with undergraduate research, internships, career services has been wonderful. They're going to be helping us work with students, one, not only to identify internships that are global, but also then to turn around and help students think about and present the skills that they've learned related to global learning in a resume format, for example, or in a graduate application. So work as much as you can, infuse it into existing systems and structures, but then, of course, there will be new things that you have to create. And for us, it was the global pathways, there was no place to put that. So the Global Citizens Project Steering Committee will be handling that in terms of certifying and providing funding. There is, I should mention, there's funding, there's incentive money for this. This is the advantage of having a QEP. There's incentive money for faculty to certify individual courses, and there's incentive money for departments to globalize their curriculum. And so that is an advantage of having a QEP, on global learning. But the point here is that one thing that we learned at USF is that there was, as I mentioned, global learning going on across the campus. In our process of developing our strategies and thinking about how to do this, we found ways, we developed ways to actually connect that, and so I think that's the biggest message I might say with that. We are in the process, as I said, we're still implementing. We have many resources available, but we'll have many more resources available in the future. So keep checking back to our website, which is www.usf.edu/GCP or /QEP. Either one of them will get you there. But please email me. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. And I really appreciate your attention, and thank you very much.
Through designing or development of this project, did you have any nuances to dealing with transfer students, and how do you factor for part-timers and transfers into your program in terms of being able to qualify to do some of these things and reap some of the rewards of their involvement?
Good question. That is also part of the reason why the award is so flexible. We wanted transfer students to have the opportunity to pursue this. And so, again, they can do it through any means that they see fit. It's also why we put internships in there. Internships was not originally in the plan, but we recognize that many transfer students are working full-time as well. And so we wanted them to have that opportunity to take that work experience and have it be a global one as well. Thank you. Sure, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah. Assessment process, yes, that's definitely in the works. At this point, I can tell you what I know we'll probably do, but we'll certainly be refining that. And that is, with the award, for example, we will do pre- and post-assessments of those students specifically earning the award. We want to know that, if the experiences that they're having as part of the process of pursuing the award actually does make a difference. And so we will be administering the Global Perspective Inventory, the Global Awareness Profile, and the HET Global Mindedness Scale to all of those students, both pre and post. But we also want to be able to compare and think about our broader student population. And so we will be doing assessments probably with a Global Perspective Inventory and the Global Awareness Profile for all of our students. We want to capture from freshmen through seniors and see. We need a baseline for those. We have a baseline for the HET, Global Mindedness Scale. We need to get a baseline for those other instruments. And then, as I mentioned, we have to develop in-house rubrics and other in-house assessments that we'll be working with faculty on. And we're going to be doing that as part of our general education assessment as well. That's where we're at this point. But it's the next stage is developing a comprehensive plan for assessment. Yes.
Thanks so much. This is a remarkable amount of work, this representative. Reading the green boxes, the aspiration for students to develop empathetic relationships, to analyze issues and their impacts on communities, to weigh potential responses, and then to take personal or collective action. It would seem that all depends deeply on the quality of the experience that students have, which always ties into program design features,
Yes.
length of term, level of immersion, the choice of selection of location. What criteria you're using and bringing to the faculty to weigh the pros and cons of those factors that would bias experiences towards the deepest educative value?
Yeah, thank you. Excellent question. We have established criteria for course certification at this point, and that's where the faculty development comes in particular, and really helping faculty think about their course and designing it in a very intentional way. In fact, the faculty development opportunities that Kara and Summer have been working on are really, truly just good course design that we're putting in there with a global spin on it. And so we're being very intentional about that. It's also an organic process. So what we're doing also is, as faculty in their courses are going to be identifying the learning outcomes for that course that are these learning outcomes that you mentioned, we're also going to be assessing the students and asking about their learning and thinking about, where was your learning greatest? Where do you really feel like you progressed the most? And we're going to be doing some analysis and sort of comparing that what faculty think they're doing with what the students are getting out of it. And that's a future thing that we'll be developing. But it's an important question, and I think a lot of it is we're going to be getting from the students through their assessment of their learning experience, and then working with, as we learn more through that process, Kara and Summer and I and others will be working to really make sure that we're providing that faculty development that will enable faculty to develop really meaningful experiences for students. All right. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much again. I really appreciate it.